Process owner is not just a new role for the organisation, it's also a new type of role. Being a process owner requires exercise of considerable influence, perhaps with little, if any, authority. It involves being the voice of the process and shaping, perhaps for the first time, genuine collaborative management. Cross-functional management, the field of engagement for a process owner, can be challenging, perhaps even disruptive. Functional managers have been happily executing the sub-processes, and now someone turns up to do what? To tell them how to do their job? To take over? To get in the way? To ruin their next bonus? How's a new process owner meant to navigate all that? One important tool, perhaps the most important, is knowledge. Deep knowledge that can lead to enlightenment. What does a process owner really do? How can they maximise their contribution? Well, here's a 3-word role description. You find it written over train stations all over the world. Mind the gap. So what's it mean here in our process world? Well, the gap, obviously, a performance gap, opportunity gap, or a problem gap. Problem to fix or avoid, or an opportunity to realise. And what do we mean by mind? Well, firstly, to know that there is a gap, to understand the nature of the gap, and then to understand the benefits of closing the gap, or the cost of not closing it, to make hard-edged business decisions about whether we should be fixing this problem or realising this opportunity, and should we do it now. So it's a very mindful thing to always be on top of the process, to understand what's happening, to think ahead, to think not only what happened last week, but can we know something about what might happen next week or the following week. So mind the gap. I always think that's a very nice 3-word definition of the process owner role. And you might recognise this picture. This is my process governance model. It has those 3 parts: authority, support and ownership. And there's a separate video all about this particular model, so I won't go into the details here, but just for some context, we've got the process owner there providing the ownership, so fixing this vision problem that we have if we're just doing traditional management, which is kind of up and down the organisation chart, whereas we know we get work done across the organisation chart, and the organisation chart tells us very little of a practical nature about who does that, who is accountable or responsible for what's happening across the organisation chart. So the process owner is the role that addresses that. It fixes that horizontal vision problem. And as we can see here, the process owner is not working alone. They've got plenty of support from the Office of BPM and from the Process Council. So what is it that the process owner is taking leadership in developing and understanding? I think it's deep process knowledge. I think that's what we need. If we're going to effectively manage our processes in an active way, to really be trying to keep them optimized, to understand what might be going to happen, to second guess problems and opportunities, to understand trends, to learn from what's happened. This is not something that we just pop in and have a look occasionally. It's continuous and it's active, and it requires this deep process knowledge. And I call that generally the process management record. And we'll have a look at one of those in a moment, just briefly. But it's just the collection of information that I would think any process owner who's on top of the process really would have at their fingertips. So the process we're going to touch on briefly here in the example comes from this notional case study that we use in training programs. It's called the White and Bright Laundry, and this is the simple version of the process architecture. And the process we're going to talk about is the large core process in the middle there, provide personal laundry service. So that starts when we receive the clothes from the customer, and it's everything we do up until we return the clothes to the customer. So that's the process that we're going to be looking at. Now, as you can see, in this process management record, the example I'm going to use of provide personal laundry service, it's in a spreadsheet. I'm not saying it needs to be in a spreadsheet. I use a spreadsheet because it's convenient, because the separate tabs can be used, but it's the information that's important. I don't mind how you store that. It might fit nicely into your modelling tool. However it's going to fit, we want it to be able to be accessible by all the people that need to access it. So I want lots of people to be looking at this data. I want it to be as public as possible. I want it to be tested. I want people to contribute. If I was a process owner, I want to make sure that this data, this whole information pack, is as complete and accurate and useful as possible. So let me just have a quick run through some issues here. We won't try and look at every piece of it. It's there's lots of detail in here. This actual spreadsheet is available at a link down below, and you're welcome to find that and use it however you'd like. This is a sort of cover sheet, if you like, the first page, and it's just it's naming the process, it's telling us who the process owner is, it's telling us some other things about how we identify and locate this process in the architecture. It's a core level 1 process, for example. And then we've got a process description, and put a bit of effort into the process description. It really should describe it. It's, we don't want to say provide personal laundry service process provides personal laundry service. That's not particularly helpful. So you just flesh it out and tell something about it. And then the next section here is a summary of current problems and opportunities. So this is the sort of thing that if someone said to the process owner, how's that process going? You could say, here it is. Here's the summary, and that would give you, at a high level, of course, quite a good understanding of what's going on in the process. So, as I say, this is a sort of cover sheet. This is the highlights, the executive view, perhaps, of what's happening in the process. So let's look at the next tab along. Now, the next tab along is process stakeholders. Now, obviously, we need to know who the stakeholders are because we're going to want to know what the stakeholders want out of the process. So we'll go through and identify stakeholders, and for each of the stakeholders, so each of these rows, we'll firstly ask, what does this process stakeholder get from the process, and what do they give, and or what do they give to the process? They might do both, or they might just do one. Of course, if they do neither, they're not a stakeholder of interest anyway. And then for each of those stakeholders, one by one, we want to know what they want out of the process. Why is it important to them? And we don't guess, we go and talk to them. Maybe that's an easy thing to do, maybe it's more complicated. The last column here in this spreadsheet is a synthesis of all of those objectives, because we've just got one process, so we need one set of objectives. We're not quite at KPIs yet, but we're getting close. These are sort of performance themes, if you prefer. So we've got to just look through at the stakeholder objectives and make sure that we can synthesize a single set. And if we can't, then maybe we've got more than one process, or maybe we need to go back and talk to stakeholders. So stakeholder understanding is vitally important, isn't it? I mean, the whole process is there for the stakeholders, so we need to be able to make sure we understand what it is they want so that we can measure it. So what's next along here? So next we come to KPIs. So now we've got here, we can identify the KPIs. This is based on those stakeholder objectives and the synthesis of the whole group. How do we translate that into a set of KPIs? And of course we want to know what the KPI is here in this top row. The first KPI we're showing here, we're saying it's customer satisfaction, and then we want to know what the target is. So we've agreed here with lots of conversation and discussions with the marketing team, perhaps 90% of respondents rate at least 9 out of 10. Okay, we can't stop there though, because where are we going to get that data from? And that can be quite complex. We need to be quite specific about it. You can't just say, oh, we'll survey. I mean, survey who and how often and all of those sorts of things. And then with the next column is showing current performance. What's the current level? We're aiming for 90% at 9 out of 10. What have we currently got? And if there's a gap, as there is here, what's the impact of that gap? What's the impact of closing the gap or not closing the gap? So not just coming up with a bland set of KPIs and some obvious targets, but actually saying, okay, how are we going to get that data and what does it mean? And if there's a gap, what does that mean? And let's make that as objective and as quantifiable as possible so that we've got something to work on. We're going to come back soon and say, okay, if there's a gap, is it worth closing? Well, unless we've got some data, some hard data and some good knowledge, then we're going to have trouble with that. The last tab I want to talk about here is just the action plan summary. So this is a summary of all of the actions that are being undertaken to have an impact on the KPI performance. So we link it in here in this first column. It's linked to the KPI. They all were numbered, just sequential numbers. And then we've got who's in charge of this action, which might be small or it might be a big project, but we capture it anyway. And if we need more data, more information about the particular action, we can put links in here to project plans and charters and stuff. So what is the planned action? And intended impact's important, isn't it? I mean, why are we doing this? What is the point? What was the business case? Something very quite specific about timing, and then in any other notes that we need to make about the action. So this again is just a summary, but this should give us a summary. I'm just showing four of them here, but there might be more, and I'm just showing that, summarising here, all of the things that we're actively doing to respond to process performance signals that we're getting. So, quick run through here. As I say, you've got access to the spreadsheet. You can look at the details, and I'm happy to talk about it if you've got further questions. But the point is, I think we need to have our process owners building a very significant body of knowledge about the process, not just knowing its name and drawing some diagrams. We need deep understanding. And based on that deep understanding, we'll be able to do good active management and therefore good improvement as appropriate. And I think the process management record, or whatever version of it you want to have, but that body of knowledge, that quite significant body of knowledge that you build up over time with lots of inputs, lots of exposure, lots of conversation about it. I think that's going to be important because the process owner, is really the voice of the process. That's the role, isn't it? Another short role description, to be the voice of the process. They're not necessarily in charge with authority across all of the sub-processes. If this is a cross-functional process, so other people are managing pieces of it. So the process owner is there to be the voice of the process. And that's all about active and continuous. It's not something you do once a year. It's not something you do when, I've got a report to give to some quarterly meeting, I better put something together. No. I would like to think that a process owner for a high impact process does some thinking about the process every day. Not all day, it's not a full-time role, but something going on all the time. Because if you're active and continuous as a process owner, then you're doing good process management. And the result of good process management is what we're wanting out of all of this. It's good process improvement. That's good process-based management. Thanks for joining me for this Process Insight. If you've subscribed to these videos, you already know that my intention is to discuss the many aspects of how to get the most out of your process management and improvement initiatives. Feedback about the videos in the comments below or through my email is very useful for me. Thanks for letting me know what you like, what you don't like, what you'd want to see more of, and what you'd like to see less of. And thanks for sharing this time with me. If you'd like to continue the discussion, I'd love to hear from you.